Hi, and welcome to Rontime. Today is the 16th of February 2013, and I'd like to start by thanking you for taking the time to invite me into your house. We're going to sit and talk about things that I think matter to me, and I hope they matter to other people because they're things that are disturbing. I'd like to begin by thanking Tucson for being a place where I could grow up with a lot of freedom to wander around in the desert, explore, and learn. And I'd also like to thank my folks for giving us the permission to go any place in Tucson on our bicycles as long as we were home by sunset. So it taught me to be a pretty free man. It taught me to be pretty wide open and receptive. And I'm hoping that I'm in a climate, in a community where that's still true. I know things have changed a lot since I was a kid here in Tucson, because in '52, there were 75,000 people in the whole valley. At this point, our population's over 1 million. Well, sorry, recently re-reported as slightly under a million, but we have been a million for the last decade. And a lot of that growth took place with the usual retirement people moving here, but also people moving for technology, optics, and good jobs. At this time, the job situation in Tucson isn't that great. Southern Arizona is not experiencing the turnaround in housing that other markets have. I know a lot about that market because I'm a designer builder. For years, I built custom solar-powered houses and worked with other designers and builders on multiple projects, especially in the solar field. I've done design work for Habitat for Humanity in the city of Tucson. I've also done design work for private clients and received awards for my designs. So I look at things from the perspective of what can be done to design solutions. I don't always see problems. I see opportunities to excel. So one of the areas that concerns me most right now is a direction that America has taken ever since the 70s, when Nixon declared a war on drugs and refused to look at the reclassification of cannabis as a non-class 1 controlled substance. In spite of evidence to the contrary, again and again and again, members of the federal government have refused to budge on their classification of cannabis as a class 1 narcotic. And as of now, America has more prisoners per capita than any other nation on earth. I did a show called Soul Mechanics with my buddy Jim Hecker in November, and on that show we talked almost exclusively for the hour about cannabis legislation and a proposal that I put to the president that he sign a presidential proclamation making April 20th, 2013, Harry Anslinger Day, a day of public service and community service where people who had been arrested on cannabis would have their records expunged, their civil rights restored, and an opportunity to work in community gardens. I believe the more community gardens are established across the United States of America, people are going to work with dirt, work with their hands, work with the sun, work with native plants, and learn to become a self-sufficient economy. I think if we farm our way out of our current situation through the legalization of hemp and cannabis, then we stand to become a net exporter of oils, cannabis products, hemp products, clothing, fabrics, all the things that are currently imported into the United States because the federal government considers those two plants controlled species and will not allow you to grow them unless you carry a medical card and you're 25 miles away from your closest medical supplier. So I believe since I challenged the President of the United States to a game of horse last November, I've tried through all my elected representatives here in this state and in southern Arizona to get that onto the president's desk so he could take a look at it and consider signing it. And the reason I challenged him to a game of horse was because we know the Defense Department is not spending much money on horses and bayonets, and I thought it would be traditional for he and I to play a game of horse to determine the outcome of whether or not he signs the proclamation called Harry Anslinger Day 2013. Now, along that lines, you got to be concerned. America is 5% of the world's population, and yet we have 25% of the world's prisoners. We worry a lot about a country called Iran. We think that their government is unstable and invasive to people's rights in that nation. And yet, for every 100,000 people in Iran, there's only 122 people in prison. In the United States, that number is much larger. It's actually 1,916 per 100,000 population. The next closest country to us is China at 230 per 100,000. And there's a reason for that. In the 70s, the Department of Justice and the Bureau of Prisons determined that if they allowed states to have their own for-profit corporate-run prisons, then it would take burdens off the federal government to house all of these people who were being arrested for drugs. And so 90% of the facilities that do for-profit corrections housing are owned by Republicans, and they in fact have turned $131 billion in profit last year nationwide. It's unfortunate that what we've become is a society that's learned to make money off of other people's misery. And when you stop to consider that in the United States, an American is arrested for cannabis every 37 seconds. That means that during the first 4 years of President Obama's administration, 2,770,120 people were arrested for cannabis. That means a peace officer had to write arrest, had to do the documentation, had to secure possessions, had to call for a tow truck to haul away the car, etc., etc., etc. Then it goes to the courts, where you have a preliminary hearing, and then potentially a trial, then a sentencing. So you can see how by having a cops and robbers game called cannabis, the Department of Corrections has become a very big money industry that is costing people in America in treasury and in human potential. And that's the part that worries me the most, because you can now be mandatorily sentenced for your first possession, even if you're a nonviolent criminal and you have no prior record. You're going to serve 6 months in a for-profit prison where you're going to work 8 hours a day and you'll be paid 20 cents an hour. That prison will take 40% of your wages back to pay for your room and board and care. So that leaves you a prisoner, an employee at 12 cents an hour, and we have 25% of the world's prisoners. There are companies in Georgia and Louisiana who are sewing contractors who make clothes with labels that say "Made in USA." Several of them are having to close because the Georgia penitentiary system has installed sewing contractors inside the prison walls, and their goods are far more price competitive than the union sewing contractors that work for private contractors outside the prison wall. And this is true because two of the most wealthy individuals in America, the Koch brothers, formed an organization called ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Commission, and it pre-writes legislation for legislators in states, allowing them to change their laws to house for-profit prisoners for fun and profit. And it's quite possible that the way the system works, their lobbying efforts, which run into the hundreds of millions of dollars in the United States, are making it more and more popular for states to have for-profit prisons. As a result, we've created a system of 21st century modern slavery. I say that because 4 out of 5 prisoners in America are people of color. So you have to see that when the Emancipation Proclamation in 1850 emancipated the slaves, there were less black men affected by the Emancipation Proclamation than are currently in American prisons. So you can see by using your tax money and your legislators how wealthy corporate individuals have turned America into a slave labor economy. You cannot possibly compete with someone who gets paid 12 cents an hour if you're required to pay the new minimum wage suggested at $9 an hour. Plus, when you're in prison, you get benefits that are paid by taxpayers, like dentistry and health care. And it's no longer feasible for Americans to ignore these facts. And I call on the President of the United States to use the power of a presidential proclamation to declare Harry Anslinger Day, April 20th, 2013, and to change the classification of cannabis and hemp to non-controlled substances. You can see that the possibility of an economic turnaround lives within these two plant species. And we could literally grow an economy instead of putting our economy on the backs of corporations that are constantly looking for cheaper ways to make their products and get them to market, including using the labor of 25% of the world's prisoners. Now, you might ask historically, why would the Congress of the United States, why would the Bureau of Prisons, why would the federal government continue to insist that they need to uphold all the laws that hold cannabis a Class 1 narcotic? Well, if you look back to the beginning of the law, the first law against cannabis was written in New York State in 1924, and it was written as a result of the successful prosecution of a black man who raped a white woman in New York State, and he had on his body, in his pockets, he was in possession of cannabis. And Harry Anslinger, a white supremacist, said, darkies who use reefer think they're good enough to dance with white women. And that's a direct quote of the gentleman who became the head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. When he testified before Congress on its classification hearings in 1927, he did not allow the testimony of any scientific evidence from 3 physicians who were there to represent the American Medical Association with the facts about cannabis. So, you can see that ever since 1927, the federal government has set it up to make sure that the black people who got the vote were still going to be at a financial, social, and economic disadvantage because of their existing habits, attitudes, and uses of a controlled substance, thereby generating a guaranteed population for the for-profit prisons. By the way, the for-profit prisons have made an agreement with the states that they need to be 90% occupied to be profitable. And Correction Corporation of America, the largest, last year had profits of $151 billion. And they operate in 48 states out of 50. So you can see where a very large game of cops and robbers is making a small percentage of the population rich off the suffering of a very large percentage of the population. Considering that even the New York Times poll and conservative polls like the Pew Research Project indicate that more than 50% of Americans no longer believe that the prohibition on cannabis serves law and order, that it is now in fact not a popular law. There are 2 states that fully legalized it, so there is no criminal repercussion for possession and growing it. There are 3 states that are considering legislation to legalize hemp as an industrial product, therefore finally recognizing its contribution. It makes paper that is 4 times stronger than pine pulp paper from forest products. 1 acre of hemp will produce the same amount of paper as 4.1 acres of forest products. And you get 3 crops a year versus 1 crop every 30 years. So, why was hemp made illegal? It only contains less than 2% THC, the active ingredient in cannabis that is the controlled substance that the Federal Bureau of Narcotics still considers a Class 1 narcotic. Hemp will produce up to 30% pure oil by content using very simple extraction methods. And you can burn this product directly in diesel engines with no filtration, with no processing other than filtration. And that would allow the United States of America to become a net oil exporter rather than an importer. Every day we send $175 million for crude oil to Saudi Arabia alone. One supplier. $175 million per day. We have unemployed farmers. We have fallow land. We have the capacity to become the world's largest exporter of hemp products. However, Randolph Hearst and a group of newspaper barons made it illegal to grow hemp because they already owned millions of acres of conifer forests, and they did not want direct competition for their paper products. So the federal government made it illegal to grow hemp. There are 3 states who are considering legislation to make hemp a legal commercial crop. These states are intelligent enough to recognize the failure of the federal government to take a leadership position when it comes to energy, independence, and economic stability. So, I'm calling on the President of the United States once again to take a look at the draft proclamation called Harry Anslinger Day, which has been forwarded to him through legislators in the state of Arizona. I believe it was also passed to him once by his wife, Michelle, but I don't have confirmation on that in fact. So, again, I'm going to ask the President of the United States to consider the draft resolution to legalize cannabis and hemp in the United States and allow this economy to be a free and open market, not to be subject to the slavery induced by two multi-billionaires and their organization called ALEC. It's time for democracy to begin working for everybody in this country, not just the wealthy and not just corporate owners. Citizens United is probably going to be overturned by the Supreme Court, and they will no longer recognize corporations as individuals. Therefore, they will not have the rights of a United States citizen. It's interesting because the rights of a United States citizen can be removed by court proceedings at any time should you be charged with felony possession of cannabis or for trying to grow hemp. So it seems to me that if we're going to apply logic and reason and science, then you will no longer in fact consider hemp or cannabis controlled substances. You will move them into the free market economy where they can make their contribution to society, to American jobs, and to a sustainable future for our kids and grandkids and their grandkids. The way we operate now is failing. $131 billion spent since I was arrested in 1974 have not stopped the flow of drugs into the United States. It is really time to take a serious look at why cannabis and hemp are illegal and take so much time in our courts, in our system of justice, and in creating prisoners that get traded around from county to county by sheriffs who need their 90% occupancy to stay profitable. The state of Arizona has more for-profit prison beds than any other state except Louisiana. It's time for us to take a serious look at the way that we're running this country, at what we're dependent upon in terms of imported energy and imported products, and turn that around, become a net exporter and a successful, sustainable economy. The other thing that this legislation would do, if enacted, is rebuild trust in law enforcement and the system of justice. Because the way that it operates now, you can be arrested for conspiracy if you're the landlord of someone who's growing or using pot. That is guilt by association and the taking of property by the federal government in the process of playing their game of cops and robbers, which is not scientifically based and is not, in fact, fulfilling the purpose of the law. The law was written to attempt to keep dangerous substances out of the hands of innocent civilians. However, the way it's being applied, it is not serving that purpose. It is serving the purpose of imprisoning more people per capita in the United States than any nation on earth. the majority of whom are people of color. So it is time. It is past time. 2,770,000 people were arrested in your first 4 years of office. I'm asking you, Mr. President, to change that statistic to 0. It's possible, it's feasible, it's cost effective. It will free up enough court time for you to concentrate at the federal level on serious drugs like cocaine, like heroin, like crack, and like methamphetamine. If the scarce resources of the federal government were turned in concentration on those dangerous drugs, then you could stop playing cops and robbers with the people who use cannabis for pain, for medicine, and for inspiration. I believe it's time. I believe the Congress will do nothing if in fact you sign a presidential proclamation making April 20th, 2013 Harry Anslinger Day. Especially if in fact that day becomes every year a day of public service where people go into their community and work on gardens where it's possible to grow medicine for other people that relieves pain, that takes away anxiety, and has been proven to kill cancer cells directly on contact. So, it really is time to move forward on this issue. I don't care if we play horse or not. I challenged you to a game of horse to try to gain your attention and to honor the fact that the federal government is not buying horses or bayonets anymore, as you so well stated in your last debate with Governor Romney. So since that time, last November, 2 states legalized cannabis. 2 states are in the process of consideration legalization of cannabis. 3 states are in the process of considering legalization of hemp. I believe it's time at the federal level to follow the lead of Raul Grijalva, who has submitted into the House of Representatives a resolution which would take all federal prosecution in states where legalization has occurred and including states where legal medical marijuana has passed. I believe, sir, it's time for Rontime to be over. I hope that you've enjoyed this time together, and I will see you next month on Rontime.